Beggar saves Millionaire's daughter from an accident. The next day his life changes. Jerome's cardboard sign was soaked from the morning drizzle. His hands trembled as he held it up, more from the cold than anything else. The sign read, "Anything helps. God bless." The marker had started to run, making the letters bleed into each other. The morning crowd rushed past him on the Manhattan sidewalk. Business suits, coffee cups, phones pressed to ears. No one looked at him. When they did, their eyes slid away like he was a stain on the concrete. "Another day," he muttered, adjusting his position on the hard ground. His spot outside the Corner Cup Cafe wasn't much, but it was his. Had been for the past 8 months. A group of young executives approached, their leather shoes clicking on the wet pavement. Jerome recognized them, same bunch that came every morning for their fancy lattes. "Look who's still here," one of them said, loud enough for Jerome to hear. "Like our personal homeless mascot." "Don't make eye contact," another warned. "He'll probably ask for money again." Jerome kept his eyes down, fingers tightening on his sign. He was 35, but the streets had aged him. His black skin was weathered, his beard scraggly. The old army jacket he wore had more holes than warmth left in it. The cafe door chimed as they went in. Through the window, Jerome watched them laugh, probably at his expense. He'd gotten used to it. Had to. Mrs. Chun, the elderly cafe owner, came out a few minutes later. She carried a paper cup and a brown bag. "Black coffee and yesterday's muffin," she said, setting them beside him. "That's all I can do today." "Thank you, Mrs. Chun." His voice was rough from disuse. "You're too kind." She shook her head. "Winter's coming early this year. Weather report says big storm next week. You should find shelter, Jerome." He nodded, but they both knew the shelters were already full. More people on the streets every day since the economy went bad. The morning wore on. Jerome helped park cars for spare change when people let him. Most didn't. A few regulars tossed him quarters or dollar bills. He kept count in his head, $3.75 so far. Not enough for a meal at the diner, but maybe some fast food later. Around noon, he overheard 2 women talking as they passed. "Did you hear Sarah Thompson's coming to inspect the new office space? The CEO's daughter? That'll be something. Hope she doesn't see all these homeless people around here. Bad for the company image." Jerome sipped his cold coffee. Rich people and their image problems. He remembered when he had image problems too, back when he wore a suit, had a desk job at an investment firm. Before 2008 wiped everything out. The young executives emerged from the cafe for their lunch break. One of them, a guy with slick back hair, dropped his coffee cup. It rolled to Jerome's feet. "Hey, make yourself useful," the guy called out. "Pick that up." Jerome stared at the cup. His dignity was about all he had left. "I'm not your janitor," he said quietly. "What was that?" The executive stepped closer. "You got something to say?" "Leave it, Brad," one of his friends said. "He's not worth it." They walked away, leaving the cup where it lay. Jerome picked it up anyway and put it in his collection bag. The streets were his home now. He kept his home clean. Night fell early, bringing colder air. The cafe closed at 8 p.m. Mrs. Chin gave him another coffee before she left. "Stay warm, Jerome," she said. "Maybe tomorrow will be better." He huddled in his sleeping bag, watching the city lights blur in the drizzle. In his pocket was a worn photo, himself in better days, with his family. Wife and kid gone now. Couldn't handle watching him fall apart after losing everything. A police car cruised by, slowing near his spot. Jerome kept still. They usually left him alone if he didn't cause trouble. "All units be advised," crackled from their radio. "VIP visit tomorrow. Sarah Thompson, Thompson Enterprises. Increased patrols in the financial district." The car moved on. Jerome pulled his sleeping bag tighter. Tomorrow would be another day of being invisible. But that was better than being noticed for the wrong reasons. His last thought before sleep took him was of his old office, 30 stories up in a building like the one surrounding him now. How fast it all could change. How fast it all did change. The city noise faded to a dull roar around him. Another night on the streets of Manhattan began. Just one more invisible man among many. The morning rush hour hit its peak at 8:30 a.m. Jerome watched the intersection from his usual spot, counting cars to pass the time. Red BMW, silver Tesla, black Mercedes. Symbols of success streaming past him in an endless parade. His coffee cup from Mrs. Chan was still warm. Big crowd today, she'd said when she brought it. Something about some important inspection. The crosswalk signal blinked from red to white. A mass of people surged forward, phones out, headphones in, minds elsewhere. Jerome noticed the black Bentley pull up to the curb across the street. The driver got out, opening the back door. A young woman stepped out, phone pressed to her ear. Her turquoise necklace caught the morning sun. Designer clothes, expensive shoes, clearly someone important. "Dad, I know how to inspect an office space," she was saying into the phone. "I've been doing this for months." "Yes, I'll check the security protocols." "No, I don't need an escort." Jerome recognized her from magazine covers and news segments. Sarah Thompson, daughter of Richard Thompson, CEO of Thompson Enterprises, the same company that owned half the buildings in this area. She started crossing with the crowd, still arguing on her phone. "Dad, I need to go." "Yes, I'll call you after." Jerome saw it before anyone else did. The red sports car running the yellow light, accelerating instead of slowing. The driver looking down at something in his lap. Sarah Thompson steps from the car's path, completely unaware. His body moved before his mind could catch up. 8 months of sitting in one spot hadn't dulled his reflexes as much as he'd thought. He launched forward, covering the distance in 3 long strides. "Watch out," someone screamed. Jerome's hands found Sarah's shoulders. He pushed hard, spinning her away from the car's path. The momentum carried them both backward. He felt the rush of air as the sports car shot past, missing them by inches. They hit the pavement together. Jerome took the brunt of the impact, making sure she landed on top of him instead of the concrete. His right shoulder exploded with pain. For a moment, everything was chaos. People shouting, brakes screeching, horns blaring. Sarah rolled off him, eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Oh my God. Are you okay?" Jerome sat up slowly, testing his shoulder. "I'm fine. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her long hair disheveled. You saved my life." A crowd was gathering. Phones came out, recording everything. Jerome heard the whispers starting. "Isn't that the homeless guy? Did you see that? Someone call an ambulance." "That's Sarah Thompson." The driver of the sports car had stopped, finally. He jumped out, phone still in his hand. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see. I was just checking a text." Sarah wasn't listening to him. She was staring at Jerome, really seeing him for the first time. "You're the man who sits outside Corner Cup." "Jerome," he said, wincing as he stood. "My name's Jerome." Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Some of the young executives from the cafe had come out to see what was happening. Their faces showed disbelief as they recognized him. "Miss Thompson." Her driver ran up, out of breath. "Are you all right? Your father's been calling." "I'm fine, James. Thanks to..." She turned back to Jerome, but uncertainty had crept into her expression. The same look he'd seen thousands of times when people realized they were talking to a homeless man. 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Officers got out, hands near their weapons. "Step back from the woman," one ordered Jerome. "Wait," Sarah protested. "He saved my life." But Jerome was already backing away, hands raised. He knew how this looked. A homeless black man, too close to a rich white woman on the ground. "Miss Thompson?" One of the officers approached her. "We'll need a statement." The other officer kept his eyes on Jerome. "You too. Don't move." More sirens approached. An ambulance this time. The crowd had grown larger, everyone filming with their phones. Jerome saw his quiet morning slipping away, replaced by questions he didn't want to answer. Sarah was talking rapidly into her phone. "Dad, I'm okay." "Yes, I'm fine." "No, you don't need to come down here." "Someone pushed me out of the way." "No, he saved me." The driver of the sports car was giving his statement, gesturing animated at his phone. "It was just one text, I swear." Mrs. Chin appeared at Jerome's side with a chair from the cafe. "Sit," she ordered. "You're bleeding." He touched his shoulder, his fingers coming away red. Must have scraped it on the pavement. A paramedic approached with a first aid kit. "Sir, let me take a look at that." Jerome sat still while she cleaned the wound. More police had arrived. He heard them interviewing witnesses, taking statements. The young executives were talking to an officer, pointing at him occasionally. The homeless guy just jumped up. Never seen him move that fast. Could have been dangerous. Sarah finished her phone call and walked over, still shaky but composed. The paramedic had just finished bandaging Jerome's shoulder. "My father wants to thank you personally," she said. "He's on his way." Jerome's stomach tightened. "That's not necessary. You saved my life," she insisted. "Let us help you." Help. He'd heard that before in the early days on the street. It usually came with strings attached, with judgments, with expectations he couldn't meet. More cameras had arrived. News vans with satellite dishes. Reporters pushing through the crowd. "Miss Thompson, can we get a statement?" "Sir, what made you react so quickly? Were you afraid for your safety?" The morning sun climbed higher, but Jerome felt cold. Everything was happening too fast. His quiet corner of Manhattan had become a circus, and he was the main attraction. Sarah's driver appeared again. "Miss Thompson, your father's car just turned onto Broadway. He'll be here in 2 minutes." Jerome stood up, testing his shoulder. It hurt, but he could move it. "I should go." "Please," Sarah caught his arm. "Wait, let my father thank you properly." He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at the approaching news cameras, the police, the growing crowd. 8 months of being invisible, and now everyone was watching. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The CEO of Thompson Enterprises was about to meet the homeless man who saved his daughter. Jerome's quiet life on the streets was about to change for better or worse. All because of one moment's notice, one split-second decision. The SUV's door opened. Richard Thompson stepped out of the SUV. 6 feet tall, silver hair, tailored suit that cost more than Jerome had made in his last year of work. His eyes scanned the scene, locked onto his daughter, then shifted to Jerome. "Sarah." Thompson strode forward, pulling her into a hug. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Dad. Thanks to Jerome." She gestured toward him. "He pushed me out of the way." Thompson turned, studying Jerome with shrewd eyes. A businessman's eyes, calculating risk and reward. "Mr. Jerome, I understand I owe you my daughter's life." "Just Jerome," he answered, suddenly conscious of his ragged clothes. "And anyone would have done the same, but they didn't. You did." Thompson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The media's already running with this. Someone uploaded a video 10 minutes ago. It's going viral." A reporter shoved a microphone toward them. "Mr. Thompson, is it true the man who saved your daughter is homeless?" Thompson raised a hand, shutting down questions. 2 security guards materialized, creating a barrier between them and the press. "Sir," a police officer approached. "We need to continue our investigation. There are some concerns." "Concerns?" Sarah stepped forward. "He saved my life." "What concerns?" The officer glanced at Jerome. "We need to verify his identity. Rule out any potential involvement." "Involvement?" Sarah's voice rose. "You think he arranged for a car to nearly hit me?" Jerome felt the familiar weight of suspicion settle on his shoulders. He'd known this was coming. A black homeless man getting too close to a rich white woman. There had to be an angle, right? "Standard procedure," the officer said. "We'll need you to come to the station." "That won't be necessary." Thompson's voice carried authority. "My security team will handle the investigation." "Sir, with all due respect, I said my team will handle it." Thompson pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the commissioner now." More cameras had gathered. Jerome saw the news tickers running across their vans. Homeless hero saves CEO's daughter and mystery man's dramatic rescue. His spot outside the cafe was visible in the background of their shots. His cardboard sign, his sleeping bag, his whole life on display. Someone had set up a live stream nearby. Jerome caught fragments of comments being read aloud. "How do we know it wasn't staged? Probably looking for a handout. Check his background." Mrs. Chun pushed through the crowd with a fresh cup of coffee. "Here," she pressed it into his hands. "Don't listen to them." A group of homeless men Jerome knew watched from the corner. Eddie, who slept in the alley behind the convenience store, called out, "Hey, Jerome, don't forget us when you're rich and famous." The others laughed, but there was an edge to it. Jerome knew how it looked. One of their own, suddenly in the spotlight. Sarah was arguing with the police officer. "This is ridiculous. I was there. I saw everything. Miss, we still need to follow procedure. Thompson finished his phone call. It's handled. No station visit needed. He turned to Jerome. But we do need to talk. Privately, the security guards began clearing a path to the SUV. Jerome hesitated. I'd rather stay here. Please. Sarah touched his arm again. Let us thank you properly. Away from all this. Jerome looked at his spot on the sidewalk. 8 months of routine, of knowing his place. Now everyone was watching, judging, speculating. Eddie's voice carried over the crowd again. Better watch your back, Jerome. Rich folks gonna use you up. Thompson's expression darkened. Shall we? The back door of the SUV stood open. Air conditioning, leather seats, a world Jerome hadn't been part of in years. His feet felt heavy as he moved forward. Mrs. Chen called out behind him. Your things? Wanting to watch them? Jerome looked back at his small pile of possessions. Please. The crowd pressed closer, cameras flashing. Jerome heard someone start a chant. Interview. Interview. Inside the SUV, the noise dimmed to a murmur. Sarah sat across from him, Thompson beside her. The driver pulled away from the curb. First, Thompson said, let me be clear. I'm grateful for what you did. But this situation needs to be managed. Managed? Sarah frowned. The media is running wild. Social media is worse. We need to control the narrative. Jerome stared out the window as Manhattan slid past. What do you want from me? For now, your story. The truth, before someone else makes up their own version. The SUV turned onto Park Avenue. Jerome saw his reflection in the tinted window. Dirty clothes, untrimmed beard, eyes that had seen too much of the street. My story's not very interesting. I'll be the judge of that. Thompson tapped his phone. Your full name? Jerome Mitchell. Employment history? Dad, Sarah interrupted. He's not a job applicant. No, but he's now connected to the Thompson name. We need to know who he is. Jerome's voice was quiet. I was a junior investment analyst at Lehman Brothers. Lost everything in '08. Thompson's fingers stopped moving on his phone. Lehman Brothers? Yeah. 15 years of climbing the ladder. Gone in a week. Sarah leaned forward. But surely there were other jobs. Not with a Lehman's collapse on my resume. Not in that economy. Jerome watched another homeless man through the window. Wife left after a year. Took our son. Couldn't handle watching me. He stopped. Some stories weren't meant for air-conditioned SUVs and corporate damage control. Thompson's phone buzzed. He read the message, frowning. The video's at 2 million views. Comments are mixed? Mixed. Sarah grabbed his phone. Her face darkened as she scrolled. This is disgusting. They're suggesting. I know what they're suggesting. Jerome had lived with those assumptions for years. Black man, homeless, must be dangerous. Must be running a scam. The SUV pulled up to a gleaming tower. Thompson Enterprises headquarters. We'll do the interview here, Thompson said. Controlled environment. Our press team will handle it. Jerome looked up at the building. 80 stories of glass and steel, reaching into the clouds. Another world. What if I say no? Then the media makes up their own story. And trust me, you won't like their version. The door opened. Security guards waited outside. Reporters had somehow beaten them there. One interview, Thompson said, let us tell your story the right way. After that, well, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let's see how it plays out. Jerome stepped onto the sidewalk. Cameras flashed. Questions flew at him from all directions. Jerome, how long have you been homeless? Did you know who Sarah Thompson was? What do you want in return for saving her? Sarah appeared beside him, took his arm. Ignore them. Keep walking. They moved toward the building's entrance. Jerome felt the weight of every eye, every camera, every assumption. 8 months of being invisible had ended. Now everyone could see him. But what were they seeing? A hero? A threat? An opportunity? The tower's glass doors slid open, welcoming him into a world he'd lost years ago. Behind him, Manhattan watched and waited for his story. The interview room at Thompson Enterprises felt too clean. Jerome sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than a year's worth of meals on the street. The PR team had given him a fresh shirt, but kept his old jacket. For authenticity, they said. We're rolling in 3, 2, 1. The cameraman pointed at the interviewer, a polished woman named Diana Chun. "I'm here with Jerome Mitchell, the homeless man who saved Sarah Thompson's life this morning," she began. "Jerome, walk us through what happened." He told the story again. Fifth time today. Each retelling felt more mechanical than the last. "And you didn't know it was Sarah Thompson?" "No, just saw someone in danger. But you must have recognized her afterward. Did you think about potential rewards?" Jerome's jaw tightened. "I thought about her not dying." The interview continued for 30 minutes. Questions about his past, his time at Lehman Brothers, his family. Diana kept steering toward what she called the redemption angle. When it was over, Thompson's PR director, Marcus, clapped his hands. "Perfect. We'll edit this down to 5 minutes. Focus on the heroic act, hint at the financial background. Human interest gold." Jerome stood up. "Can I go now?" "Actually," Marcus checked his tablet. 3 more outlets, 1 interviews. "Plus, you're trending on Twitter." "Trending?" Marcus turned the tablet around. Jerome saw his own face, captured mid-rescue. Hundreds of thousands of retweets, comments flooding in. "Background check this guy, hashtag suspicious. Another staged rescue for clicks. Nobody just pushes a billionaire's daughter out of traffic, hashtag conspiracy." But there were others too. "Finally some good news, hashtag homeless hero. Give this man a job. Thompson Enterprises better help him out." The door opened. Sarah stepped in, holding her phone. "Jerome, have you seen the news?" Marcus grimaced. "Maybe we should take a break, Dash. They found your old Facebook page," she continued. "From before. Someone posted photos of your family." Jerome's stomach dropped. "What?" She handed him the phone. There he was, 12 years younger. Suit and tie, arm around his wife Maria. Their son Tommy grinning with missing front teeth. The Christmas before everything fell apart. The comments below were brutal. Abandoned his family and now plays hero. Probably blew all their money on drugs. Once a banker, always a banker. "Don't trust him." Jerome handed the phone back, hands shaking. "I need some air." "Wait," Marcus called. "Fox News is sending a crew." Dash. Jerome pushed past him into the hallway. The building's endless glass windows made him feel exposed. Every employee he passed stared, whispered, took subtle photos. He found a bathroom, splashed water on his face. In the mirror, his reflection looked alien. The new shirt, the old face, the eyes that couldn't hide years on the street. His last thought before sleep took him was of his old office, 30 stories up in a building like the one surrounding him now. How fast it all could change. How fast it all did change. The city noise faded to a dull roar around him. Another night on the streets of Manhattan began. Just one more invisible man among many. The morning rush hour hit its peak at 8:30 a.m. Jerome watched the intersection from his usual spot, counting cars to pass the time. Red BMW, silver Tesla, black Mercedes. Symbols of success streaming past him in an endless parade. His coffee cup from Mrs. Chan was still warm. "Big crowd today," she'd said when she brought it. Something about some important inspection. The crosswalk signal blinked from red to white. A mass of people surged forward, phones out, headphones in, minds elsewhere. Jerome noticed the black Bentley pull up to the curb across the street. The driver got out, opening the back door. A young woman stepped out, phone pressed to her ear. Her turquoise necklace caught the morning sun. Designer clothes, expensive shoes, clearly someone important. "Dad, I know how to inspect an office space," she was saying into the phone. "I've been doing this for months." "Yes, I'll check the security protocols." "No, I don't need an escort." Jerome recognized her from magazine covers and news segments. Sarah Thompson, daughter of Richard Thompson, CEO of Thompson Enterprises. The same company that owned half the buildings in this area. She started crossing with the crowd, still arguing on her phone. "Dad, I need to go." "Yes, I'll call you after." Jerome saw it before anyone else did. The red sports car running the yellow light, accelerating instead of slowing. The driver looking down at something in his lap. Sarah Thompson steps from the car's path, completely unaware. His body moved before his mind could catch up. 8 months of sitting in one spot hadn't dulled his reflexes as much as he'd thought. He launched forward, covering the distance in 3 long strides. "Watch out," someone screamed. Jerome's hands found Sarah's shoulders. He pushed hard, spinning her away from the car's path. The momentum carried them both backward. He felt the rush of air as the sports car shot past, missing them by inches. They hit the pavement together. Jerome took the brunt of the impact, making sure she landed on top of him instead of the concrete. His right shoulder exploded with pain. For a moment, everything was chaos. People shouting, brakes screeching, horns blaring. Sarah rolled off him, eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God," she gasped. "Oh my God. Are you okay?" Jerome sat up slowly, testing his shoulder. "I'm fine. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her long hair disheveled. You saved my life." A crowd was gathering. Phones came out, recording everything. Jerome heard the whispers starting. "Isn't that the homeless guy? Did you see that? Someone call an ambulance." "That's Sarah Thompson." The driver of the sports car had stopped, finally. He jumped out, phone still in his hand. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see. I was just checking a text." Sarah wasn't listening to him. She was staring at Jerome, really seeing him for the first time. "You're the man who sits outside Corner Cup." "Jerome," he said, wincing as he stood. "My name's Jerome." Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Some of the young executives from the cafe had come out to see what was happening. Their faces showed disbelief as they recognized him. "Miss Thompson." Her driver ran up, out of breath. "Are you all right? Your father's been calling." "I'm fine, James. Thanks to—" She turned back to Jerome, but uncertainty had crept into her expression. The same look he'd seen thousands of times when people realized they were talking to a homeless man. 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Officers got out, hands near their weapons. "Step back from the woman," one ordered Jerome. "Wait," Sarah protested. "He saved my life." But Jerome was already backing away, hands raised. He knew how this looked. A homeless black man, too close to a rich white woman on the ground. "Miss Thompson?" One of the officers approached her. "We'll need a statement." The other officer kept his eyes on Jerome. "You too. Don't move." More sirens approached. "We'll take you out through the parking garage." Jerome looked at the papers scattered across the table. His whole life dissected by strangers. Former colleagues from Lehman Brothers giving interviews about him. Old neighbors sharing stories. Everyone with an opinion, a theory, a judgment. "The security training offer still stands," Thompson said. 3 months of paid training. Apartment included. After that, if you qualify, a position on our corporate security team. "And if I don't want it?" Thompson's face hardened. "Then you're on your own with the media circus." And the threats. Sarah shot her father a look. "Dad." "No, he needs to understand the situation." Thompson leaned forward. "You're a public figure now, Jerome. Like it or not, you can either let us help you handle it, or—" He left the sentence hanging. Jerome knew what he meant. Back to the streets, but now with cameras following him. With people knowing his face, his story, his shame. "I need time to think." "You have until morning," Thompson said. "For now, we're moving you to a hotel." Security guards appeared at the door. Professional, discreet, everything Jerome wasn't. The ride to the hotel was silent. They took a service entrance, avoiding the press. The room was bigger than any place Jerome had slept in years. "Try to rest," Sarah said before leaving. "Tomorrow will be better." But sleep wouldn't come. Jerome paced the room, watching news coverage of himself on the massive TV. His phone kept buzzing. He finally turned it on, scrolled through the messages. One from Maria. "Tommy saw the news. He's proud of you." The words hit him like a punch. Tommy, 15 now. Did he remember his father? Or just the man who disappeared from his life? Another message from Eddie. "Sorry about earlier. Streets make us mean sometimes." "You did good." Around midnight, someone knocked. Jerome tensed, but it was just Mrs. Chun, escorted by hotel security. "Brought you some real food," she said, holding up a bag. "That fancy room service, not good for the soul." She'd made him soup, the same kind she sometimes gave him on cold mornings. They sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. "Those executives," she said, "they come to my cafe today. Talk different about you now. Funny how saving rich girl changes their mind. Everything's changed." "No." She pointed at his chest. "Inside, you same Jerome. Just world seeing you now. World seeing what they want to see. So show them truth." She stood up. Tomorrow you take job offer. Mrs. Chindash, no argue. 8 months I watch you keep dignity on street. Now life gives chance, you take it. After she left, Jerome opened his old Facebook page. Photos from his past life filled the screen. Birthday parties, office celebrations, family vacations. A different man. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Found something you should see. Coming up. Minutes later, she arrived with a laptop. Look at this. She opened a video. People sharing their own stories of falling from grace, of losing everything, of climbing back. They're inspired by you, she said. You started a conversation about homelessness, about second chances. I didn't ask to be a symbol. No one ever does. She closed the laptop. But you are one now. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Jerome walked to the window. Somewhere out there, Tommy was watching. Maria was watching. Every person who'd ever ignored him on the street was watching. The security training, he said. How hard is it? Very. Dad doesn't believe in handouts. You'll have to earn it. Good. He turned from the window. I'll do it. Sarah smiled. I'll tell Dad Dash, but I have conditions. What conditions? I do this my way. No more interviews. No PR stunts. And I want to help others on the street. Real help, not just photo ops. She studied him for a moment. Dad won't like losing control of the narrative. Then I walk. Sarah pulled out her phone, dialed. Dad? We need to talk about Jerome's terms. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan. In a few hours, training would begin. A new chapter, a new chance. But first, Jerome had one more thing to do. He picked up his phone, found Maria's number. Hey, he said when she answered. Tell Tommy. Tell him I'm coming back. Not today, not tomorrow. But I'm coming back. The sun rose over the city, painting the buildings gold. Somewhere below, his cardboard sign still sat in Mrs. Chin's cafe. A reminder of where he'd been, where he'd never return. The security training center smelled like sweat and rubber mats. Jerome stood with 5 other trainees, all ex-military or law enforcement. He wore the provided uniform, black pants, gray polo shirt, boots that still felt stiff. Mitchell, the instructor, Reynolds barked. Front and center, Jerome stepped forward. 2 weeks into training, he still felt like an imposter. Scenario time, Reynolds said. High-profile client enters through main lobby. You spot suspicious behavior. Walk us through your response. Jerome's throat went dry. The other trainees watched, some smirking. They'd made their opinions clear. Street people didn't belong here. He cleared his throat. I maintained visual contact while radioing dispatch. While doing what with the client? Keeping them away from the threat. How? Jerome froze. The protocol swirled in his head. Pages of procedure he'd studied late into the night. Reynolds sighed. Martinez, show him. A former Marine stepped forward, smoothly demonstrating the proper technique. Hands at 10 and 2. Guide the client while maintaining situational awareness. Establish clear exit route. Jerome's face burned. He'd read that exact procedure 10 times last night. Again, Mitchell. Until you get it right. They drilled for hours. Hand-to-hand techniques, radio protocols, emergency responses. Jerome's muscles screamed, unused to the constant movement after years of sitting still. During break, he checked his phone. Another message from Tommy. Dad saw you on the training videos someone posted. You look different in the uniform. Jerome smiled. Tommy had started texting regularly, short messages about school, sports, life. Building bridges across the years. Mitchell. Reynolds approached. A word. They stepped into the hallway. Reynolds crossed his arms. You're falling behind. I'm trying, Dash. Trying isn't enough. Thompson Enterprises has standards. You're here because Mr. Thompson wants you here, but that only goes so far. Jerome straightened. Give me more time. Extra training. You've got 2 weeks to pass the physical quals. After that, Reynolds shrugged. Streets might be calling you back. The words hit hard. Jerome watched Reynolds walk away, remembering every doubtful look, every whispered comment. Hey, Sarah's voice surprised him. She stood by the water fountain, dressed for the office. How's it going? Shouldn't you be at work? Taking a detour, she studied his face. That bad, huh? Jerome leaned against the wall. I'm not cut out for this. Funny. That's what they said about me running development projects. Different situation. Is it? She pulled out her tablet. Look at these. Security camera footage played. Jerome watching the street from his corner. Stopping fights before they started. Helping lost tourists. Managing drunk college kids without confrontation. 3 months of footage, Sarah said. You were doing security work already. Just didn't know it. Reynolds says dash. Reynolds says what his experience tells him. Prove him wrong. Jerome watched the footage again. She was right. The street had taught him awareness, psychology, threat assessment. Different names for survival skills. The physical quals dash are in 2 weeks. So train harder. She put the tablet away. Dad bet on you. I bet on you. Time to bet on yourself. That night, Jerome stayed late. Reynolds found him practicing takedown techniques on a dummy. Mitchell? It's past 8. Need to practice. Reynolds watched him work. Your form's wrong. Hips lower, hands here. He demonstrated. Jerome copied the movement. Better. Reynolds stepped back. Why are you really here? To prove I belong. No. Truth. Jerome wiped sweat from his face. My son. He's proud of me for the first time in years. Can't let him down again. Reynolds nodded slowly. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Extra training before class. You don't have to dash 6 a.m., Mitchell. Don't be late. The next 2 weeks blurred. Regular training all day. Extra sessions morning and night. Jerome's body ached constantly. He dreamed about protocols and procedures. Some nights, sitting in his temporary apartment, he missed the simplicity of his corner. No expectations, no pressure. Just survival. But then Tommy would text, Dad, ace my math test. Getting stronger like you. The final qualification test came too soon. Obstacle course, takedown demonstrations, protocol scenarios. The other trainees went first, smooth and confident. Jerome waited his turn. Hearing Reynolds' words, streets might be calling you back. Sarah appeared beside him. Nervous? Terrified? She handed him a coffee. Mrs. Chin made it. Says it's good luck. The familiar taste centered him. 8 months of Mrs. Chin's coffee. Watching the world from his corner. Learning the rhythms of the street, the signs of trouble, the ways to defuse tension before it broke. Mitchell, Reynolds called. You're up. Jerome handed the empty cup to Sarah. Everything he'd learned on the streets, everything he'd trained for these past weeks, it all came down to this. The obstacle course loomed before him. Walls to climb, windows to clear, civilians to protect. Begins. Jerome moved. His body remembered the streets, climbing fences to escape gangs, sliding through tight spaces to find shelter, staying low and fast. The takedown scenarios came next. Muscle memory from Reynolds' extra training kicked in. Hips low, hands positioned right, smooth transitions. Protocol tests followed. Jerome heard Mrs. Chin's voice. You same Jerome. Just world seeing you now. He spoke clearly, confidently. The streets had taught him to read people, to spot trouble coming, to think 3 moves ahead. Now he had words for those instincts, procedures to channel them. Finally, Reynolds called time. Jerome stood at attention, breathing hard. The other trainees watched silently. Sarah gripped her tablet. Reynolds checked his clipboard. Looked up. Congratulations, Mitchell. You passed. The room exhaled. Sarah grinned. One of the trainees, Martinez, stepped forward, offered his hand. Nice work, man. Never seen someone clear the wall that fast. Jerome shook his hand, still processing. He'd done it. Prove them wrong. Prove himself wrong. His phone buzzed. Tommy. How'd it go, Dad? Jerome looked at Sarah, at Reynolds, at his fellow trainees. Looked down at his uniform, no longer feeling like a costume. Passed, he texted back. Your old man's not done yet. Reynolds clapped his shoulder. Get some rest. Real work starts tomorrow. Jerome nodded, but his mind was already on the streets. Not as a resident this time. As someone who could help, who could make a difference. Someone his son could be proud of. The Thompson Enterprises security uniform fit perfectly now. Jerome adjusted his tie in the mirror, checking his earpiece, making sure his badge sat straight. First day on official duty. Looking sharp, Martinez said, entering the locker room. Ready for the corporate jungle? Ready as I'll get. They headed to the morning briefing. Jerome's assignment. lobby security, main entrance, where everyone would see him, where the executives who used to mock him would have to show him their IDs. Reynolds stood at the front of the briefing room. Mitchell, Martinez, lobby desk. Thompson's got board meetings all day. High traffic. Copy that, they answered in unison. The lobby gleamed with marble and chrome. Jerome took his position, remembered his training. Back straight, eyes moving, awareness constant. The morning rush started. Employees streamed in, most barely glancing at him. Then came the first familiar face, Brad, the executive who dropped coffee at his feet months ago. Brad stopped short. Your ID, please, sir. Brad fumbled for his badge. Jerome checked it professionally, no expression. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Have a good day. Brad hurried past, already on his phone. Jerome heard him whisper, the homeless guy's working security now. Martinez grinned. Friend of yours? Ancient history. The day moved fast. Jerome fell into the rhythm, checking badges, monitoring the entrance, coordinating with other teams through his earpiece. Around noon, Mrs. Chin appeared with a coffee cart. New contract, she announced proudly. Thompson Enterprises wants my coffee now. Good coffee brings good business. She winked at Jerome. They both knew who'd recommended her to the corporate cafe program. Looking proper now, she said, handing him a cup. But same eyes. Good eyes. The afternoon brought challenges. A delivery without proper authorization. A heated argument between employees that needed defusing. A suspicious package that required protocol activation. Jerome handled each situation smoothly. The streets had taught him to stay calm under pressure. Training had given him the tools to channel that calm effectively. Mitchell, Reynolds' voice in his earpiece. Thompson wants to see you. Martinez, cover his post. Jerome rode the elevator to the executive floor. Sarah met him at the reception desk. Dad's impressed, she said. Whole security teams talking about how you handled the package situation. Just followed protocol. And that argument in the lobby? That wasn't protocol. That was all you. She was right. He'd seen the tension building between the two employees, recognized the signs from years of watching street confrontations. A quiet word here, a strategic position there, and the situation dissolved before it could explode. Thompson's office door opened. Jerome, come in. The office was bigger than Jerome's entire temporary apartment. Thompson stood by the window, looking out over Manhattan. How's the first day? Good, sir. No major issues, except the package and the argument. Thompson turned. Reynolds says you're showing a natural talent for threat assessment. Jerome thought of his corner, how he'd learned to read people, to spot trouble before it started. The streets teach you things. Yes, they do. Thompson sat behind his desk. That's why I have a proposition for you. He slid a folder across the desk. Jerome opened it. Plans for a new security initiative. Community outreach, Thompson explained. Working with local homeless, helping them access services, preventing confrontations before they start. Jerome studied the plans. You want me to run this? You understand both worlds now. Streets and corporate. We need that perspective. A knock at the door. Sarah entered with another folder. The apartment paperwork you asked for, Dad. Thompson nodded. Your temporary housing expires next week. This is for a permanent lease. Company rate, walking distance to work. Jerome's hands tightened on the folder. A real apartment. A real job. A real future. Take the evening to think about it, Thompson said. Both offers. Back in the lobby, Martinez was dealing with the afternoon rush. All good upstairs? Jerome nodded, still processing. His phone buzzed, a text from Maria. Tommy's asking if he can visit sometime. The words blurred on the screen. Visit. His son wanted to visit. The lobby doors opened. A homeless man shuffled in, looking lost. Security protocol said to escort him out immediately. Jerome approached instead. Can I help you? Looking for. The man's eyes darted around. Someone said there's services. Jerome recognized the look. The same one he'd had first days on the street. Lost. Scared. Desperate. Come with me. He guided the man to a quiet corner. Let's figure this out. Martinez watched, then spoke into his radio. Situation handled. Mitchell's got it. By end of shift, Jerome had connected the man with a shelter program, gotten him a meal, made some calls to support services. Not exactly standard security work, Reynolds commented, watching. No, sir. Jerome straightened his tie. But maybe it should be. That night, in his temporary apartment, Jerome looked at the two folders. Community outreach plans. Permanent lease papers. His phone buzzed. Tommy, Mom says I can visit next month. That okay, Dad? Jerome looked out his window. Somewhere down there was his old corner. His old life. He picked up the folders and started reading. Time to build something new. Something his son could visit. Something he could be proud of. The city lights flickered outside, but Jerome didn't notice. He was too busy planning tomorrow. 3 months into his new role, Jerome walked his old neighborhood in a different way. The security uniform had become a second skin, but he'd kept his army jacket. Wore it over his uniform on community patrols. Helped bridge the gap. Yo, Jerome? Eddie called from his usual spot. Got another one for you. A young woman sat next to Eddie, clutching a backpack. Fresh on the streets, Jerome could tell from her eyes. Still had hope in them. I'm Lisa, she said quietly. They said you could help? Jerome crouched down to her level. That's what I'm here for. He'd helped 23 people off the streets so far. Thompson Enterprises' new community program provided resources, shelter connections, job training, medical care. Jerome provided the trust needed to access them. Mitchell, Martinez's voice in his earpiece. Thompson wants you back at base. Copy. 10 minutes. Jerome handed Lisa a card. Go to this address. Ask for Mrs. Chun. Tell her Jerome sent you. The Corner Cup Cafe had become an unofficial halfway house. Mrs. Chun provided coffee, food, and a safe space while Jerome arranged more permanent solutions. Back at Thompson Enterprises, Jerome found Sarah waiting in the lobby. Dad's got news, she said. Good news? The executive floor felt different now. Jerome belonged here, even if some still doubted. Thompson stood at his window, watching the city. The community program's working better than expected. Board wants to expand it. He turned, handed Jerome a report. Numbers, statistics, success stories. 23 people transitioned off the streets, Thompson continued. 15 in stable jobs. 0 security incidents around our properties. The data speaks for itself. Jerome remembered each face, each story. What's the expansion plan? 3 more districts. Teams of 4 each. And we need someone to run it all. Jerome looked up from the report. Sir? Program director position. Full benefits, significant salary increase. Thompson sat down. You've earned it. The door opened. Reynolds entered with another folder. Final performance review, he announced. Top marks across the board. Ready for command position. Jerome opened the folder. Page after page of evaluations, recommendations, commendations. There's something else, Sarah said. Show him, Dad. Thompson pressed a button on his desk phone. Send them in? The door opened again. Jerome turned. Maria stepped in. Behind her, Tommy. Jerome froze. His son had grown taller than in the photos. Looked more like him now. Hey, Dad. Tommy's voice was deeper too. Nice office. Jerome couldn't move. Couldn't speak. 3 months of texts and calls hadn't prepared him for this moment. We'll give you some privacy, Thompson said, standing. Take all the time you need. They filed out. Thompson, Reynolds, Sarah. The door closed softly. Tommy spoke first. Mom showed me your old corner. Where you used to stay. Tommy Dash, it's okay. He stepped forward. I understand better now. Why you couldn't come home? Maria touched Jerome's arm. We both do. The city stretched out below them, indifferent to the moment happening 80 stories up. Jerome's old corner was just visible, a tiny patch of concrete that had held him for 8 months. I saw the people you're helping, Tommy said. Mrs. Chun told us stories. Jerome found his voice. I wanted to make you proud. You did? Tommy hugged him suddenly. You are. They talked for hours. About the past, the present, the future. Tommy's school, his sports, his friends. Maria's job, her life, her forgiveness. Jerome's phone buzzed occasionally. Community cases, security alerts. He ignored them all. Finally, Maria stood. We should go. Hotel reservation. Stay, Jerome said quickly. My apartment. It's not much, but... Tommy grinned. Pizza and catching up? Yeah, pizza, and catching up. They rode the elevator down together. In the lobby, Eddie waited with Lisa. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but she's ready for the shelter intake." Jerome looked at Maria. She nodded. "Go. Do your job. We'll get dinner started." He handled Lisa's intake quickly, efficiently. Got her placed in the women's shelter, arranged for counseling, job training. "You were like me," she said before leaving. "That's what they said. That you lived on these streets." "Yes. And now I'm here. You will be too." Back at his apartment, Jerome found Tommy and Maria setting up pizza boxes. The place was small but clean. Photos on the walls, his graduation from security training, his team at work, the newspaper article about the rescue that changed everything. "Eddie says you check on him every day," Tommy said. "Make sure he's okay. Someone did the same for me once." Jerome thought of Mrs. Chun, her daily coffee and kindness. They ate pizza, talked more, made plans for future visits. Around midnight, Maria and Tommy left for their hotel, promising to return tomorrow. Jerome stood at his window afterward, looking at the city. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Saw the family reunion. Dad's running background checks on more potential hires for the program expansion. Another buzz. Eddie, Lisa's settled in at shelter. Says thank you. And another. Reynolds, command training starts Monday. Don't be late. Jerome touched the window glass. Somewhere out there, 23 people were sleeping indoors tonight because he'd helped them. Tomorrow, maybe 24. His uniform hung ready for morning patrol. His new director's badge waited at the office. His son's laughter still echoed in the apartment. The streets had taken everything from him once. Now they'd given it all back, with interest. Full circle. 1 year to the day after the rescue, Jerome stood at the same crosswalk where it had happened. The morning sun hit the intersection just like it had then, but everything else had changed. Location secure, Martinez reported through the earpiece. His team was scattered around the perimeter, watching. Today was the official launch of Thompson Enterprises' expanded community outreach program. Press conference in an hour. All eyes would be on Jerome again, but this time he was ready. Mrs. Chen approached with her coffee cart. Special day, needs special coffee. She'd expanded too. 3 carts now, all staffed by people Jerome had helped off the streets. Nervous? She asked, handing him a cup. A little? Don't be. You earned this. The intersection filled with familiar faces. Eddie, now a paid community liaison. Lisa, working as a program coordinator. Dozens of others Jerome had helped over the past year. Thompson's car arrived first. Then Maria and Tommy. Finally, Sarah's Bentley pulled up to the same spot it had a year ago. Security perimeter established, Martinez reported. All clear. Jerome touched his new tie pin, program director, community outreach division. Still felt strange sometimes. Ready? Sarah asked, joining him. Ready? The press conference podium stood where Jerome had once sat with his cardboard sign. Life had a sense of irony. Thompson spoke first, announcing the program's expansion. 5 districts now, 15 full-time outreach teams, partnerships with shelters, job training centers, medical facilities. But numbers don't tell the whole story, he said. For that, I'll turn it over to our program director, Jerome Mitchell. Jerome approached the podium. Cameras flashed. A year ago, they'd filmed him being questioned by police in this same spot. A year ago today, he began, I was sitting right here. Homeless, hopeless, invisible. The crowd was silent. In the front row, Tommy gave him a thumbs up. One moment changed everything. Not just the rescue, though that opened the door. The real change came from people believing in second chances. From a company willing to look past appearances. From a community ready to help if someone just showed them how. He gestured to his team. In 1 year, we've helped over 200 people find housing. Jobs. Hope. Not through charity, through opportunity. The same opportunity one got. The speech continued. Jerome announced new initiatives, expanded services, partnership programs, but his eyes kept going back to his old corner. Afterward, reporters swarmed him. Different questions now. What's the program's 5-year plan? How do you select candidates for job training? Will other companies adopt your model? Jerome handled each question professionally. Thompson watched with approval. Sarah beamed. When the crowds thinned, Eddie approached. Got a new one for you, boss. Guy's been watching from around the corner. Too scared to come over. Jerome nodded. Where? West side. By the old spot. Jerome walked to his former corner. A man stood there, holding a cardboard sign. The same kind Jerome had held. I'm Jerome, he said softly. What's your name? Michael. The man's voice shook. I saw the news. About your program. Want to tell me your story? Michael talked. Former teacher. Medical bills. Family gone. The familiar spiral. Jerome listened, then made a call. Mrs. Chun? Got room for one more. Always room, she answered. Send him over. He walked Michael to the cafe, just like others had done for him. Behind them, the press conference crowd dispersed. The cameras packed up. Life moved on. Back at the office, Jerome had command training to run. New team leaders to prepare. But first, lunch with his family. They ate at a small diner. Jerome, Maria, Tommy, even Mrs. Chin joined them. Tommy talked about college applications. Maria shared news about her promotion. Remember when you first came to my cafe? Mrs. Chun asked Jerome. So angry. So lost. You gave me coffee anyway. Saw something in your eyes. Same thing you see in others now. Jerome's phone buzzed. A message from Thompson. Board meeting tomorrow. Bring expansion proposals for next year. Another from Sarah. Dad's talking nationwide program. You ready? And one from Martinez. 2 more came in, hearing about the program. Want to meet you? Jerome looked around the table. His family. His future. A year ago, he did nothing but a corner and a cardboard sign. Dad? Tommy asked. You okay? Yeah. Jerome smiled. Just thinking? About what? About tomorrow. They finished lunch. Jerome had meetings to attend, teams to supervise, lives to change. The streets had taught him survival. Now he taught others to live. Outside the diner, he paused at the crosswalk. The same one where everything had changed. Mitchell. Martinez's voice in his earpiece. New arrivals at the center need processing. On my way. Jerome straightened his tie, checked his badge, started walking. Behind him, the corner where he'd once sat stood empty. Ahead, the Thompson Enterprises tower rose into the sky. Somewhere in between was the man he'd become. The crosswalk signal turned white. Jerome moved forward. Another day of changing lives began. Not a bad view from this side of the street.